The living room lamp was turned to its dimmest setting. Vivian Lin stood in the doorway of the bedroom, wearing a silk nightgown I'd never seen before. Her hair hung loose, her face bare of makeup. 4 years of marriage. This was the first time she'd come home before 10 at night. Ethan. Her voice was soft. So soft it didn't sound like her. You're still awake? I sat on the couch, phone screen glowing with tomorrow's appointment confirmation from the Civil Affairs Bureau. She walked over and sat down beside me. Close enough that I could smell her shower gel. She reached out and touched the back of my hand. Tonight, she paused. Could you not sleep in the guest room? I didn't move. She leaned in, her hair brushing my shoulder. 4 years of marriage. It was the first time she'd ever initiated closeness. The first time she'd ever worn that expression in front of me. I closed my eyes. Get some rest, I said. We have an appointment at the Civil Affairs Bureau tomorrow. My name is Ethan Chen. I'd been married to Vivian Lin for 4 years. 4 years as a live-in husband. The term was generous, really. A hired nanny had it better. At least a nanny got paid. I got nothing. Vivian was the CEO of Lin Group, having taken over her family's company at 26 and doubled its market value in 3 years. In business, she was known as an iron lady. At home, she was no different. At our wedding, her mother had announced to every relative present, Ethan, marrying our Vivian is the greatest fortune of your life. I said nothing. Neither did Vivian. She just looked at me, and I remember that look to this day. Like I was a piece of furniture she'd just bought. Not objectionable, but hardly something to be cherished. Life after the wedding was harder than I'd imagined. She was out early and back late, sometimes disappearing for days. I cooked, cleaned, did laundry, paid the bills, ran errands for her mother, and queued at hospitals to get her father's checkup appointments. Her mother dropped by unannounced to inspect. Once, she found an unwashed bowl in the kitchen sink. She called Vivian on the spot. Is this the man you married? Can't even wash a single bowl? Vivian mumbled something on the other end that I couldn't catch. Her mother hung up and looked at me. Ethan, honestly. Vivian works her fingers to the bone every day, and you can't even manage the house. I'll wash it right now, Mum, I said. She huffed and left. That night, Vivian came home late. I waited in the living room, wanting to talk. She came in, changed her shoes, glanced at me. Still up? Waiting for you. Something wrong? Mum came by today. She frowned. What did she want? Nothing, just don't argue with her, she cut me off. Whatever she says, let it slide. I didn't argue, I said. She didn't respond. She walked straight into the bedroom and shut the door. I sat in the living room for a long time after that. That was my marriage. No fights, no infidelity, no abuse, just coldness, like 2 strangers sharing an apartment. No, roommates at least split the utilities. I didn't even have a key of my own. The one I had was a spare that her mother gave me. Once I forgot it and called Vivian. She said she was in a meeting and told me to figure it out myself. I waited downstairs for 3 hours. When she finally showed up, she glanced at me. Couldn't you have found somewhere to sit? I forgot my wallet, I said. She said nothing, unlocked the door. Her mother arrived later that night with a backup key. Don't make Vivian come down to let you in. She's busy enough without handling your little problems. Got it, Mum, I said. She put the key on the shoe rack, a little bare keychain dangling from it. This is my grocery key, she said. You can use it for now. I took it. It smelled like the vegetable market. That was my place in this family. A man who used his mother-in-law's shopping spare key. The first year, I tried to change things. I found a job in a small company, doing admin work. Not much pay, but at least I wasn't stuck at home all day. Vivian didn't say anything when she found out, but her mother called. "Ethan, do you think we can't support you?" "No, I just wanted to... Wanted to what?" "Vivian's company is huge. Why don't you help there? Going out to work for strangers, how does that reflect on the Lin family?" I didn't go to her company, and I stopped bringing up work, because I knew that if I went to her company, I'd lose what little dignity I had left. Looking back, I should have left then, but I didn't, because I kept telling myself she wasn't cold, just reserved. I thought if I gave her time, she'd see how much I cared. I thought patience and kindness would eventually earn a smile. I was wrong. Year 2, her birthday. I spent a month's allowance on a silver necklace, nothing extravagant, but I thought it was pretty. She came home and I handed it to her. She glanced at it. "How much?" "Not much, I just thought you'd like it." She set it on the coffee table. "Don't waste money next time." Then she went to her room. I never saw her wear it. Later, I spotted it on her mother. "Vivian said, 'You have no taste,' and told me to deal with it," her mother said. I didn't say a word. I threw the box away that night. Year 3, her father was hospitalized. I stayed by his bedside for 7 days. Her mother said, "It's your duty." When he was discharged, Vivian actually said thank you. I was happy for a whole day. Later, I realized she thanked me because she didn't have to take time off work. Nothing more. Year 4. This year. She started traveling frequently, sometimes gone a whole week. Her mother said, "The company's busy, you need to understand." I understood. I always understood. Until last month. I found a document in her study. The document was on her desk, left out. Maybe she forgot. Or maybe she assumed I never went in there. I rarely did. In 4 years, I'd been in her study maybe 5 times. But her mother had asked me to find a property deed. So I opened the desk drawer. No deed, but I found a share transfer agreement. 35% of Lin Group's shares. Transferred to a man named Brian Zhou. Price, 0. Uncompensated transfer. I read it again, and again. Lin Group was built by Vivian's father. When Vivian took over, she held the controlling stake. 35% of Lin Group was worth at least $200 million at current valuation. Uncompensated? I pulled out my phone and took photos. Then I put the document back. The deed was in the bottom shelf of the bookcase. Her mother scoffed when I handed it to her. "Can't even find something in its place. Useless." I didn't respond. That night, Vivian came home late. I was waiting on the couch. She glanced at me. "Still awake?" "Waiting for you." "Something wrong?" "Did you go to the office today?" She frowned. "What about it?" "Nothing. Just asking." She didn't respond, went to her room, shut the door. I pulled out my phone and looked at the photos again. The share transfer. Brian Zhou. I'd heard his name, her college classmate, now VP of Lin Group. Rumors swirled about them. I'd never asked, because I believed in trust. In hindsight, I was naive. The next day, I made an excuse and visited Lin Group's office, first time in 4 years. The receptionist recognized me, but looked puzzled. "Mr. Chen, are you here to see Ms. Lin?" "Yes. Is she in?" "She's in a meeting. Would you like to wait?" I said yes, and sat in the lobby. 20 minutes later, Vivian came out of the elevator. Brian Zhou was beside her. They were talking, close together. He said something, and she laughed. That laugh, I'd never seen it once in 4 years. When she spotted me, her smile vanished. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you, privately." "About what?" "Personal." She checked her watch. "I have a meeting in 10, make it quick." I glanced at Brian Zhou. He was looking at me too. A look I couldn't quite read, not hostility, condescension. "I'll wait." She considered. "Fine, my office." She walked off. He followed. They were close again. The receptionist glanced at me and quickly looked away. I waited 40 minutes. She came in, holding a folder. "What is it?" "Brian Zhou." Her hand paused. "What about him?" "The share transfer, 35% to him, uncompensated." She stared at me. "How do you know?" I saw the agreement. A silence. "That's a company matter, none of your concern." 35%, uncompensated, that's not company matter. "Ethan, you don't understand business. Don't talk about things you don't know." "Then explain it to me." She set down the folder. "I don't want to discuss this." "Vivian, I'm your husband." She met my eyes. "And you remember that?" "Like a knife." "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know what it means. 4 years. What have you done? For the company? For this family?" All you do is cook and clean. Do you know how exhausted I am out there? The pressure I face every day? So you give away 35% of the company to someone else? That's my business." "Vivian?" "Enough." She cut me off. "I'm not going to fight with you. If you're unhappy, we can divorce." She said it calmly, like she was commenting on the weather. I looked at her. Suddenly I realized I'd never known her. "Did you mean that?" "Yes." "You're serious?" "I don't joke." I sat down on the couch. The office was quiet. Traffic hummed outside. "Fine," I said. "Let's do it." She blinked. "You're sure?" "Yes." "Okay, I'll have my lawyer draft the papers." She reached for the phone. I stood. "Don't bother, I'll handle mine." She looked surprised. "You're sure?" "Yes." I walked out of her office. As the door closed behind me, I heard her make a call. Her voice was low, but I caught some words. "He knows. Pause. I'll handle it." I drafted my own divorce agreement using a template online. I left the property division blank, because I knew it didn't matter. Lin family assets had nothing to do with me. After 4 years, I didn't even have a bank account. Household finances were Vivian's domain. Her mother gave me a monthly allowance, 2,000 yuan, for groceries, utilities, household supplies. Sometimes it wasn't enough, and I covered the shortfall from what little I'd saved before marriage. But I had no savings of my own now. I had no income. The day I finished the draft, I sent it to Vivian by text. No reply. At 11 that night, she came home, saw the papers on the coffee table, and flipped through them. "You left the property section blank?" "Nothing to divide." She looked at me. "You're sure?" "Yes." She set the papers down. "Fine, I'll have my lawyer look at it. If it's clear, we'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau the day after tomorrow." "Okay." She went to her room. Door clicked shut. I sat on the couch and looked at the photos again. That 35%. $200 million. I'd looked up Brian Zhou, her college classmate, VP of Lin Group. He already held 5%. With this transfer, he'd be the largest shareholder. Why would she do this? I couldn't make sense of it, but I knew something was wrong. The next day, I went to a law firm, not the Lin family's lawyer. A referral from a friend, a Mr. Wang. He looked at my photos. "There's a problem," he said. "What?" "Uncompensated transfer is legal, but if these shares are marital property, your consent is required." Lin Group was inherited by Vivian before marriage. Doesn't that make it separate property? Technically, yes, but if these 35% were acquired after marriage, that changes things. What do you mean? What was Vivian's stake when she took over? 51%, I think. And now? I don't know. Mr. Wang thought for a moment. Can you find out the current share structure? I'll try. I went to the Business Registration Bureau. What I found shocked me. Vivian's current holding was 40%, 11% lower than when she started. Where did that 11% go? I checked the change records. Over 3 years, there had been 3 share transfers. Each time, Vivian's stake fell. And Brian Zhou's rose, from 0 to 5%, then 15%. Now another 35 would take him to 50%. Majority control. I sent the information to Mr. Wang. He was silent for a long time. "Ethan, your wife may have been set up." "What do you mean?" "This pattern of dilution isn't normal. It looks like someone's been slowly eating away at her stake." "Brian Zhou?" "Hard to say, but one thing is certain. If she transfers this 35%, she'll lose control of the company." "Why would she do it?" "That's what you need to ask her." I hung up, sat in my car for a long time. Vivian wasn't stupid. She was sharp in business. She had to know what this meant. Unless Brian Zhou had something on her. Or there was a deal I didn't know about. I decided to dig deeper. Over the next few days, I investigated Brian Zhou. His background was clean: elite school, foreign MBA, investment banking, then Lin Group. Competent, and Vivian trusted him. But one thing caught my attention. He'd joined Lin Group 3 years ago, exactly when Vivian started transferring equity. And he'd brought a team with him. One member, Ming Zhao, an accountant who'd previously worked for the firm that audited Lin Group. I followed the thread. 3 years ago, Lin Group had undergone a financial restructuring, handled by Ming Zhao's old firm. After that restructuring, the company's financials had changed. I couldn't see exactly how, but the timing was too coincidental. Vivian started transferring shares right after. I decided to find Ming Zhao. He now worked as a finance director at a small firm. He agreed to meet me at a coffee shop. He looked about 40, wore glasses, and spoke cautiously. "Mr. Chen, what's this about?" "The financial restructuring 3 years ago. Were you involved?" He stiffened. "How do you know about that?" "I found out." "You're Mrs. Lin's?" "Her husband." He studied me. "Mr. Chen, I'm not at liberty to discuss this." "Why?" "Confidentiality agreement." "What if I told you Vivian is in trouble?" A long pause. "What kind of trouble?" "She's about to transfer 35% of her shares to Brian Zhou, uncompensated." Ming Zhao's face went pale. "What?" "You heard me." He lifted his coffee cup. His hand trembled slightly. "Mr. Chen, I'd advise you to stop digging." "Why?" "For your own good." "Mr. Zhao, I'm her husband." He looked at me. "Do you really know your wife?" That stopped me cold. What do you mean? Some things are better left unknown. Please, tell me. He set his cup down. The restructuring 3 years ago was actually His phone rang. He looked at the caller ID and his expression changed. Sorry, I need to take this. He stepped away and spoke briefly. When he came back, he was pale. Mr. Chen, I have to go. Mr. Zhou. I'm sorry, I really can't say more. He grabbed his bag and walked out fast. I sat there, watching him go. The fear in his face was unmistakable. I looked up Ming Zhao's current employer, and the name made my blood run cold. Brian Zhou was listed as the legal representative. Brian Zhou held 60% of that firm. Ming Zhao held 10%. Ming Zhao was Brian Zhou's man. Had he been sent to test me? Or had he been genuine and then got spooked? Back home, Vivian was already there. She stood when I came in. Where were you? Running errands. What kind of errands? Nothing. She studied me. Ethan, are you investigating something? No. Don't lie. I'm not. She held my gaze for a long moment. Better not be. She went to her room. The door closed. My heart was pounding. She knew I was digging. Now what? The next morning, she was gone before I woke. A note on the table. Home at 8. We need to talk. I looked at the clock. 7:03 a.m., 12 hours. I had no idea what she wanted to talk about, but I knew it wouldn't be good. That day, I met with Mr. Wang again. He listened and frowned. Ethan, your wife likely knows you're investigating. I know. What are you going to do? She said she wants to talk tonight. I'll see what she has to say. Be careful. I will. From the law office, I went somewhere I'd never been. Lin Group's finance department. I knew a junior accountant named Liu. We'd met once when Vivian sent me to deliver documents. I called her. Liu, it's Ethan Chen, Vivian's husband. Mr. Chen, how can I help? I'd like to ask about the financial restructuring 3 years ago. What do you know? A long silence. Liu? Oh? Mr. Chen, I don't really know much. Liu, I won't ask much. Just one question. Was there money missing after that restructuring? Another silence. Longer this time. Liu? Liu? I really don't know, Mr. Chen. Her voice was shaky. All right, thank you. I hung up, but I knew, she knew something. She was just too afraid to say it. That evening, 7:30, I came home. Vivian was there, sitting on the couch, a document in front of her. Back? Yeah. Sit down. I sat across from her. She pushed the document toward me. Read this. I picked it up. A divorce agreement. Different from my draft. This one had detailed property division. The house to her, the cars, the savings, the company shares. I got nothing. You sure about this? This is what you deserve. What I deserve? 4 years. You didn't earn a dime. These assets are mine before and during marriage. You have no claim. Vivian, you really want to be that ruthless? Not ruthless, factual. And the share transfer? 35% to Brian Zhou? Her face flickered. How do you know about that? I saw the agreement. You? Vivian, what are you doing? Do you know what 35% is worth? Why are you giving it away? She was silent. That's my business. You're my wife. Your business is mine. Not for long. Vivian? Enough. She stood. I don't want to fight. Are you signing or not? Not unless you tell me why. She looked at me. In her eyes, something I'd never seen before. Not anger, fear. Ethan, some things are better off unknown. Then tell me. I can't. Why? Because... Her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her face went white. I need to take this. She stepped onto the balcony and closed the door. I watched her through the glass. She spoke for a few minutes. When she came back, her face was ashen. Ethan, we'll discuss the agreement another time. What happened? The company. There's an issue. I have to go. She grabbed her bag and was gone. The door clicked shut. I sat there looking at the divorce papers. Something wasn't right. The fear in her eyes. What was she afraid of? I called Mr. Wang. Can you check something for me? What? Is there any unusual activity at Lin Group, like a takeover attempt? A pause. Ethan, how did you know? Know what? I just heard. Someone's been buying up Lin Group's stock, in bulk. Who? Who? A man named Brian Zhou. My hand was sweaty on the phone. How much? About 8% so far, with his existing 15, plus your wife's transfer. 58%. Yes, if it goes through, he'll be the majority shareholder. Does Vivian know? She must. The buying was authorized by her. What? Ethan, your wife may not be the victim here. Then what? She may have been in on it from the start. I hung up and sat in the dark living room. Vivian, in league with Brian Zhou? It didn't make sense. Lin Group was her father's legacy. Why would she hand it over? Unless Brian had something on her. Or there was a deal I didn't know about. I decided to find Vivian. She'd gone to the office, she said, but when I got there, the front desk was closed. The building's security guard told me she wasn't there. Where did she go? Not sure. I called her. No answer. Texts went unread. I sat in my car, thinking. Then I thought of her mother's place. She always went there when things got rough. I drove over. The lights were on. I rang the bell. Cheryl Zhang answered, startled. What are you doing here? Mum, is Vivian here? No. Mum, I know she is. She looked at me with a complicated expression. Come in. I stepped inside. Vivian was on the couch, eyes red. When she saw me, she turned away. What are you doing here? Looking for you. Why? I want to know what's going on. She said nothing. Her mother sat down beside her. Ethan, Cheryl began. There are things we didn't want you to know. What things? She glanced at Vivian, who nodded. Cheryl sighed. 3 years ago, the company had a problem. What problem? Vivian was scammed. Scammed? Someone used fake contracts to steal money from the company. How much? $5 million. I blinked. $5 million? Yes. Vivian had just taken over and was inexperienced. By the time she realized, the money was gone. Did you go to the police? We couldn't. Why? The money was moved through the company accounts. If we reported it, the company's reputation would be destroyed. And the money trail led to some dangerous people. So you just accepted it? No, someone helped us. Who? Brian Zhou. I stared at her mother. Brian Zhou? He helped recover the money, but the price was 6. What price? Vivian had to transfer company shares to him over time. I turned to Vivian. Is this true? She didn't answer, but her face said it all. And you agreed? I had no choice. You could have gone to the police, hired lawyers. You don't understand, she cut me off. That 5 million wasn't ordinary money. If it wasn't recovered, the company would fail. Everything my father built would be gone. Everything my father built would be gone. So you sold yourself? She looked at me. Tears welled in her eyes. I had no choice. I sat down, exhausted. Why didn't you tell me? What could you have done? That was the knife, right there. You think I'm useless? That's not what I meant. Then what? Ethan, you're my husband. When things go wrong, the first person I think of is not you, it's Brian Zhou. She had no answer. Her mother spoke up. Ethan, honestly, you don't have a job. What could you do? I looked at them both and laughed, a hollow, broken sound. So in your eyes, I'm just dead weight. That's not. Then what? Cheryl opened her mouth and closed it. I stood up. Fine, I understand now. Ethan? I'll sign the divorce papers. I looked at her. But I'll tell you one thing. What? Brian Zhou has been buying up shares in Lin Group. Her face went pale. What? 8% already. With his 15 and your 35, he'll be majority shareholder. No, that's impossible. Check it yourself. She made a call, spoke a few minutes, her face went white. How did this happen? She turned to me. Ethan, what do I do? I looked at her. You're asking me? Didn't you just say I'm useless? She had no reply. I turned and walked out. Back home, I sat on the couch. My phone kept buzzing. Vivian called multiple times. I didn't answer. Texts poured in. Ethan, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please help me. Please. I didn't reply. Not out of anger, but because I knew the situation was worse than she realized. Brian Zhou had covered his tracks, and even if I wanted to help, I wasn't sure it was possible. Besides, why should I help her? 4 years, she'd never treated me like a husband. In her eyes, I was just a freeloader. Now she needed me? I called Mr. Wang. I need you to check something. What? Brian Zhou's funding. Where did he get the money to buy the shares? I'll see what I can find. I hung up and sat in the dark. A thought was forming in my mind. The 5 million scam. Who set it up? Brian Zhou? If he'd engineered it, then he'd played the hero to get leverage over Vivian. The whole thing could be a setup. If that was true, he was dangerous. The next morning, Mr. Wang called. Ethan, I found something. What? The funding for Brian's purchases came from an offshore account, anonymous. But I traced the origin, a company called Mingyuan Investment. Never heard of it. Its legal representative is Cheryl Zhang. I froze. Vivian's mother? Yes. I couldn't speak. Ethan, you there? Yeah. What? Here. What do you want to do? I need to think. I hung up. Cheryl Zhang? Working with Brian Zhou? Why would she sabotage her own husband's company? Unless She had a reason I didn't know. I went to the business registry and pulled Ming Yuan's records. Founded 4 years ago. Legal representative, Cheryl Zhang. 2 shareholders, Cheryl Zhang and a man named James Zhou. James Zhou. Related to Brian? I looked him up. 58 years old, retired factory worker. Same surname as Brian, but the age didn't match. Brian was 32. James could be his father, 26 years difference, plausible. But I dug deeper. James had a son, not Brian. Someone named Brian Wen. So who was Brian Zhou to James? Then I found it. James and Cheryl had been high school classmates, so Cheryl knew Brian's father, and Brian himself. I went to confront Cheryl. Vivian answered the door. Ethan? Is your mother here? Yes. What's this about? I need to talk to her. Vivian looked wary, but let me in. Cheryl was watching TV in the living room. She frowned when she saw me. What now? Mum, I need to ask you something. What? About Ming Yuan investment. Her face went pale. How do you know about that? I checked. You're investigating me? Mum, what's your relationship with James Zhou? Who? Who? The other shareholder of Ming Yuan. Silence. He's my high school classmate. Just a classmate? What else? And Brian Zhou? What's his connection? What are you trying to say? Mum, Brian is buying up Lin Group's shares. Did you know? She stared at me. What? You didn't know? Mum, what is your relationship with Brian Zhou? She didn't answer. Vivian's face changed. Mum, is that true? Cheryl's eyes filled with tears. Vivian, I'm so sorry. Sorry for what? Brian, he's your brother. The room went silent. Excuse me? Vivian's voice was ice. Brian is your half-brother. That's impossible. I don't have a brother. You do. Cheryl wiped her tears. 30 years ago, I gave birth to a son. Your father's business was just starting. We couldn't afford 2 children. I gave him up for adoption, to a couple named Zhou. You gave him away? Yes. So Brian, he's your brother. Vivian stepped back, hitting the coffee table. That's why you brought him into the company. That's why you helped him. I just wanted to make up for it. Make up for it? He's destroying the company. No, he wouldn't. He's already bought 8%. With the 35, you forced me to transfer. He'll own the majority. Cheryl's face went white. No. Call him, now. Cheryl dialed. No answer. Again. No answer. Her hand trembled. He's not picking up. Vivian looked at her mother, tears streaming. Mum, you ruined me. I stood there, watching. It was absurd. Vivian had thought Brian was helping her. He was actually taking over, and her own mother had enabled it. What do we do now? Vivian looked at me. Ethan, help me. How? You. Vivian, 4 years, you never treated me like a husband. Now you need my help? She had no answer. Do you know where Brian's funding came from? Where? Ming Yuan Investment, your mother's company. She turned to her mother. You gave him money? Cheryl couldn't meet her eyes. How much? $5 million. $5 million? That was the money from the scam? That money, it wasn't actually stolen. Brian set up the scam. He told me if I helped him, he wouldn't press charges for me abandoning him. I had no choice. Vivian stared at her mother, tears flowing. You chose him over Dad's company? Over me? I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this. Vivian sank onto the couch, defeated. He watched her, a pang of pity, but I shoved it aside. Vivian, what are you going to do? She looked up. I don't know. Then listen to me. Listen to you? If you want to save your company, yes. Doubt flickered in her eyes. You can help? Maybe, if you trust me. A pause, then, okay, I trust you. I called Mr. Wang. I need an application for an asset freeze. Whose assets? Brian Zhou's shares. Grounds? His funding is suspicious. Suspected money laundering. Evidence? Yes, Ming Yuan's transfer records. Good, I'll prepare it. I turned to Vivian. You need to call an emergency board meeting, tonight. Now? Yes, because Brian doesn't know we've uncovered his play. We need to act before he does. She nodded and started making calls. Cheryl sat in the corner, silent. I watched them. This family was broken in ways I hadn't imagined. Tonight, the so-called useless husband was going to fight back. 8 p.m, Lin Group boardroom. All directors present, including Brian Zhou. He sat at the opposite end of the table, looking at me with undisguised contempt. Ethan, what are you doing here? I'm attending the board meeting. You? Do you have a seat? I'm Vivian's husband. She holds 40%. I represent her. He smiled coldly. Fine. What's this meeting about? One thing. Which is? Your illegal acquisition of Lin Group shares. His smirk faded. Excuse me? Your funding, from Ming Yuan Investment, Cheryl Zhang's company. So what? The legal representative is Cheryl Zhang, Vivian's mother. That's between me and her. No, that's between you, her, and the illegal transfer of company assets. You're bluffing. I have proof. I pulled out a folder. This is Ming Yuan's transfer records, and this, another folder, is Ming Zhao's sworn statement admitting that he helped you fake the restructuring 3 years ago to steal $5 million from the company. Brian's face went grey. You're lying. Want me to call Ming Zhao and have him repeat it? He was silent. The room was dead quiet. Brian Zhou, anything to say? He glared at me, hatred burning in his eyes. Think you've won? Seems that way. You're wrong. What do you mean? Did you think I was the only buyer? I froze. What? What? Ask your wife. How much does she own now? I turned to Vivian. Is he telling the truth? She didn't answer. Vivian! I already transferred 35% to him, yesterday. I stared at her. Yesterday? After all I told you? He said if I transferred, he'd drop charges against Mum. I had no choice. I felt every ounce of remaining hope drain out of me. So you gave him the shares? I'm sorry. I told you he was using you, and you still did it? I didn't want Mum to go to jail. I laughed, a hollow laugh. Vivian, did you really think giving him the shares would make him spare your mother? He promised. He lied. I showed her my phone, a text from Brian Zhou to Ming Zhao. Shares secured. Time to close the net. Vivian read it. Her face went white. I've been played. I looked around the boardroom. Such a tragedy. Vivian thought she was saving her mother by trusting Brian. Cheryl thought she was compensating her abandoned son, and Brian thought he was walking away with the company. But he forgot one thing. I pulled out my phone and dialed. Hello, Economic Crimes Unit. I'd like to report a crime. Brian stared at me. You called the police? Yes. You. Brian, you thought you'd win, but there's still the law. He had no answer. 10 minutes later, officers arrived and took Brian into custody. Cheryl, too, for her role in Ming Yuan. Vivian sat in the boardroom, alone. I was about to leave when she looked up. Ethan, I'm sorry. For what? For never treating you like a husband. It doesn't matter. Could we try again? I looked at her. A long pause. Vivian, do you know why I stayed so long? Why? Because I believed you'd eventually see my worth, that you'd value me. I see it now. It's too late. Why? Because I don't love you anymore. Her tears fell. Ethan. Goodbye, Vivian. I walked out. Her sobs followed me down the hall. I didn't stop. Some things, once shattered, can't be pieced back together. Our marriage, from the first moment she looked at me like I was furniture, was already doomed. I stepped outside. Night air hit me, cold and clean. I looked up at the sky. Tomorrow would be clear. But tomorrow had nothing to do with me anymore. Because tomorrow I had a divorce appointment. I took a cab home. The city lights blurred past, and with them 4 years of memories. Cheryl's endless criticism, Vivian's perpetual coldness, the necklace given to her mother, the week in the hospital for one thank you, the 3 hours waiting downstairs. All the silent humiliations I'd kept inside, hoping. But tonight, when Vivian had still signed away the shares to save her mother, something in me finally died. Love doesn't disappear overnight. It wears down, day by day, under neglect and disrespect. Back at the villa, the house felt empty. On the coffee table, my draft divorce agreement and hers. I took her version, signed my name neatly at the bottom. No pain, just peace. I packed my things. One old suitcase held everything I owned. Clothes, an empty jewelry box, a notebook tracking household expenses. Nothing in this mansion was truly mine. I'd come with nothing, and I was leaving the same way. I sat on the couch, looking at the appointment confirmation on my phone. At 2 a.m., the front door opened. Vivian came in, eyes swollen, clothes rumpled, smelling of police station disinfectant. Cheryl had been detained. The family was in ruins. She saw the suitcase, saw the signed papers, and rushed to me, reaching for my arm. I moved away. Ethan, can we void the agreement? My mother, I'll work it out. The shares, the courts will reverse it. Just don't leave me, please. Her voice was rough. I was blind. I ignored everything you did. I thought you were useless. But today, I saw, only you ever truly cared. I looked at her, calm. Vivian, realizing it now doesn't change it. I'll change. I'll treat you as an equal. I'll give you a company, shares, anything. Last night I asked you to stay. I meant it. I was sorry for the coldness. I just couldn't admit it. I shook my head. On our wedding day, you looked at me like I was a piece of furniture. I cooked, cleaned, managed everything while your mother criticized me endlessly, and you never defended me. I spent a month's allowance on a birthday gift. You gave it away. I found the share transfer and came to you. And your first reaction was to suggest divorce. Those things, each one, I held inside for 4 years. I wasn't waiting for you to fall apart and then beg me to stay. She knelt, gripping my pant leg. I know I wronged you. I'll give you anything, half the company, just don't go. I never wanted your money. I gently pried her fingers loose. I married you because I loved you. I thought patience would earn your affection, but 4 years proved we're not compatible. You saw yourself above me. You judged people by money. To you, I was never your equal. That's not something I can cross. She sank to the floor, sobbing. You fought for me tonight. You uncovered everything. You must still care. I uncovered the truth because I hate seeing honest people destroyed by schemes. I'd have done it for anyone. I picked up my suitcase. 9 a.m. tomorrow? Civil Affairs Bureau. I'll be there. I walked out. Her cries faded behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't get a hotel. I called an old friend and crashed at his spare apartment. Small, plain, no luxury, no staff, but free. No one to please, no one to impress. Dawn came. I washed up and took a cab to the bureau. At 8:50, I waited. At 9, Vivian arrived alone, plain dress, dark circles, clutching a revised agreement. Ethan, I changed it. An apartment, $50,000 in savings, as compensation. I didn't take it. No, I wrote I'd walk away with nothing. I meant it. I don't want your compensation. The process was quick. Photos, signatures, stamps. Red certificates in our hands. 4 years, over. Outside, sunlight. Warm. Vivian lingered. Can I still contact you? The company has legal issues. I need your help. Direct business matters to Mr. Wang. Personal, no. A pause. Goodbye, Ethan. I nodded and walked away. Didn't look back. 6 months passed. I took my small savings and started a consultancy with 2 partners, specializing in corporate disputes. No Lin family backing, from zero. I ran clients, researched cases, built relationships. Busy, but satisfying. No more free domestic labor, no more sneers. Every dollar earned was my own. Mr. Wang kept me posted on Lin Group. Brian Zhou was convicted on multiple charges. His illegally acquired shares were frozen and returned. Cheryl Zhang received probation for cooperating with prosecutors. Vivian recovered full control. But Mr. Wang said Vivian had inquired about me many times, had even tried to send me a property key. I refused it all. One autumn afternoon, I was at a cafe near my office, reviewing files, when I looked up and saw Vivian. She was dressed casually, no longer the Iron Lady. She held a small gift box. I was passing by, didn't mean to interrupt. She set the box on my table. Inside, the necklace you gave me. I retrieved it from Mum, had it cleaned, returning it. I looked at the familiar chain and pushed it back. I gave it to you. It's yours. Ethan, I've thought a lot. If I'd trusted you more, listened to you, could we have made it? There are no ifs, I said gently but firmly. Divorce showed me what I needed. A marriage isn't built on one-sided sacrifice. We wanted different things. You need a business equal. I need mutual respect and love. We're not compatible. Her eyes dimmed. Then she nodded. I understand. I wish you happiness. You too. She left. Her silhouette was lonely, but she didn't turn back. I watched the autumn leaves fall. The resentment, the disappointment, all faded. The 4-year marriage was a lesson. I lost a one-sided love, but I found myself. My phone buzzed. A partner with a new case. I packed up and walked out. Winter came with cold rain. My practice grew. I rented a larger office, hired 2 young assistants. No more working out of cramped cafes. One evening, Mr. Wang called. Ethan, Lin Group's legal team, passed along an invitation. Vivian's hosting an anniversary gala. She'd like to formally thank you for exposing Brian's scheme. I traced the grain on my desk. Tell her I appreciate it, but I won't attend. Official matters, coordinate through you. Personal, no. Mr. Wang sighed. She's changed, Ethan. More considerate, less arrogant. Her mother's on probation, living quietly. She's never quite moved on. Moving on is her journey. I opened the window, letting in cold air. What broke us wasn't Brian. It was 4 years of disrespect. I've healed. I won't reopen old wounds. I hung up, grabbed my coat, and drove to a local market. My new apartment has a small yard. I cook for myself now. No more catering to a full household. I buy what I like. At the market, behind me, Ethan. I turned. Vivian stood in the rain, a black umbrella in her hand. No assistant. Just her, wearing a thin coat, raindrops on her shoulders. I didn't expect to run into you here. She clutched the umbrella. I went to your office. Your assistant said you'd come here. I turned back to picking ribs. If there's business, have your lawyer contact me. I don't want business channels. She stepped closer, angling the umbrella to shield me. I wanted to tell you. I kept the necklace. I didn't give it back to Mum. I spent 6 months reconsidering our marriage. I finally understood. You never wanted money. You just wanted respect, and I never gave it. It's too late for that. I paid for my meat, walked past her, letting the rain hit me. When I spent 7 days in the hospital with your father, you thanked me for saving you the trouble of taking leave. When I gave up my job to manage the household, you and your mother treated me like a freeloader. When I found the share transfer and asked you about it, you suggested divorce. Apologies can't undo that. Vivian caught up to me. I know I wronged you. Let me give you the Riverside apartment. Let me invest in your firm. I just want to make it right. I don't need making right. I stopped and faced her. Since divorce, I've built something from nothing. Every contract we win is my own. When I was with the Lins, I had no dignity. Now I stand on my own feet. I won't tie myself to your money again. Rain poured harder. Vivian stood in it, the umbrella tilted wrong, half her coat soaked. Can't there be another chance? You fought hard to uncover the truth. You must have still cared. I did it because I hate injustice. I'd have done the same for anyone. I opened my car door. Vivian, we're different people now. You think in business terms. I want simple, equal partnership. Our paths are divergent. Forcing it would just repeat the past. I got in and drove off. In the mirror, she stood alone in the rain, umbrella lowered, letting herself get drenched. I didn't soften. I drove home. That night, I made rib soup. Quiet. Peaceful. My phone lit up with a text. Her number. Short. Wishing you safety and happiness. I won't bother you again. I read it, deleted it, and never replied. Year-end. An industry conference. I attended as a guest speaker representing my small consultancy. The ballroom was full of notables. Old Lin Group contacts saw me, not with the old mockery, but with a new respect. At intermission, Vivian stood by the window with a glass of wine. She saw me, nodded from a distance. I nodded back and turned to conversation. Later, she spoke on stage. No mention of Lin Group's performance. Instead, she spoke of the crisis. I used to measure everything by wealth and status. I overlooked the people who truly valued me. Now I know respect and equality matter more than anything. Whispers rippled. People guessed she meant me. As she passed me on her way down, she murmured, "Thank you for making me who I am today." I nodded. "Wishing you well is enough." After the event, partners wanted to celebrate. I declined and walked out into the snow, the first of the year. Behind me, footsteps, Cheryl Zhang. She was older now, her sharpness gone. She wore a plain coat and carried a thermos. "Ethan, a minute?" She looked apologetic. "I was blind. I favored my lost son, made your life miserable, ruined your marriage. This is soup I made, just a small gesture." I didn't take it. "Mrs. Zhang, the past is over. You focus on Vivian and the company. Let us not have further contact." Her eyes watered. "I know I was awful. You can't forgive me. But Vivian, she hasn't slept well in months. She says if she'd only treasured you." "We all chose our paths," I said. "I gave chances, many. They were ignored. Divorce was freedom for both of us." I walked into the snowy night, took a cab home. Warm lights in my small courtyard. I retrieved the old household notebook from a drawer. I looked at it a moment, then placed it in a storage box. The memories, disappointment, hope, heartbreak, needed to stay sealed. Spring came. A big corporate restructuring case occupied 2 months. After closing it, my partners proposed a beach retreat. The sea was blue, the breeze salt-tinged. I walked along the shore, watched the tide. A news alert on my phone. Lin Group restructures to reduce personal control, strengthen board system, company performance steady. I read it, skimmed it, closed it. Vivian's life was on course. Mine was too. Back home, the young assistant mentioned Vivian had said in an interview she wouldn't consider romance for a while, focused on her business. I said nothing. Some people are meant to cross your path just once. They teach you to value yourself, to know that true love doesn't demand self-sacrifice. We'd loved, we'd failed, we'd let go. The car drove away from the coast. Sunlight streamed in. The desperate man in that cold villa was gone. In his place stood someone with a future, built on his own terms. Spring turned to summer. My consultancy was steady, and I'd carved out a quiet rhythm, early mornings in my courtyard, evenings cooking or reading. One afternoon, my receptionist buzzed. "Mr. Chen, there's someone downstairs asking for you. Vivian Lin." I set down my contract. "Tell her I'm not available. If it's business, she can contact Mr. Wang." She went down and came back with a brown envelope. "She said she wouldn't take up your time. Just left this." Inside, 2 items. The silver necklace I'd bought years ago, polished and restored, and a thick notebook. I opened it. Vivian's handwriting, dated from the day she signed the divorce papers onward. Every page was a reflection of her anger at her mother's betrayal, the stress of Brian's unraveling, the way she'd slowly realized how much she'd taken for granted. The early mornings when I'd had breakfast ready, the nights I'd waited up, the 7 days by her father's bedside, her mother's criticisms, and my quiet endurance. The final page read, "I'm not asking for reconciliation. I only hope you'll accept the necklace and know that I regret my cruelty." I closed the notebook, set the necklace on my desk. That evening, I drove to Lin Group. The receptionist was startled. She called Vivian, who hurried down in a tailored suit, a faint hope in her eyes. I handed her the envelope. "I'm returning these. The necklace belongs to you. You should keep it. And the notebook, I read it. But I don't need your guilt." Her hands tightened on the envelope. Ethan, I only wanted to make amends. Amends don't undo the past. My tone was quiet. I waited years for one word of appreciation. It never came. When you realized what you'd lost, I'd already let go. Couldn't we try again? I've changed. I'm not the same person. I'm learning to cook. I'm listening more. I'm not too proud to be wrong anymore. Change is good for you, but it doesn't mean I owe you another chance. I looked at her without resentment. I've found a different path. Real love requires mutual respect, not endless concession. I gave that for 4 years, and it was dismissed. I'm not going backward. I turned and drove off. She stood alone outside the high-rise, clutching the envelope. She didn't come to my office again. Mr. Wang mentioned she was doing better, transforming Lin Group's culture, treating employees with respect. Her mother had also changed, volunteering at a senior center. Summer. I was invited to speak at a citywide entrepreneur conference. In the front row, Vivian. She listened through my talk, clapped with the rest. As we left, she approached, keeping her distance. Your speech was great. I'm genuinely happy for you. Thank you, I said, turning to speak with colleagues. Later, a fellow entrepreneur asked, She seems different, and she obviously wronged you. No chance of a second look? I shook my head. Broken glass, even glued back, shows every crack. It's not about holding a grudge. It's about not wanting to live with the shards. A week later, I got word my grandmother was ill. I went back to my hometown, a quiet coastal town where life was unhurried. I took walks with her, cooked simple meals, and rested. One evening, I spotted a familiar figure at the park entrance. Vivian, laden with gift bags. My grandmother saw her first. Isn't that your former wife? I steered my grandmother away, but Vivian hurried over. I asked around. I heard your grandmother wasn't well. She offered the bags, just some tonic foods. Kind of you, but no. I blocked her hand. I can manage. Please don't. My grandmother, gentle soul, tried to smooth things over. Vivian, dear, come in for some tea? I replied for both of us. No, Grandma, we've divorced. There's no need for further visits. Vivian's face fell. I just wanted to check on her. You don't have that role anymore, I said softly but firmly. During our marriage, you rarely visited her. Now we're apart. It's inappropriate. She set the bags down and walked away. She didn't look back. My grandmother patted my hand. Seems she's truly sorry. Couldn't you try? I watched Vivian's distant figure. Grandma, I was sorry for 4 years. I kept hoping. She never saw it. Now she sees it, and I don't need it anymore. People can't always wait for others to catch up. I returned to the city a month later. At my office, there was a letter from Vivian. It wasn't pleading. It was calm. She wouldn't push anymore. She'd take care of Lin Group, her mother, herself. She wished me success and a future partner who valued me properly. Enclosed was a dried ginkgo leaf. I fed it all to the shredder. That autumn, I opened a branch office in the new district. At the opening, Mr. Wang sent a photo of Vivian at a charity gala, composed, serene, standing alone. I replied, "Good to see." And that was all. 2 years passed without any crossing of paths. Occasionally, business media would mention both of us in the same issue, me handling small business law, her strengthening her legacy, but our trajectories were parallel lines. I met someone, a quiet, independent woman who ran a small bookstore. She didn't care about money or status. We cooked, gardened, visited markets together. Simple, equal. One weekend, we were at a mall. I was buying plants. Across the aisle, Vivian and her mother. Our eyes met. Her gaze fell on the woman beside me. She nodded. I nodded. I took my girlfriend's hand and turned away. No words exchanged. As we left, she asked, "Who was that?" Someone from my past. Doesn't matter." I squeezed her hand. "What's in front of me is what counts." The sunset stretched our shadows across the street. The man who'd once been trapped in a gilded cage was gone. In his place, a life of his own making. Vivian, I knew, would be fine in her own way. We'd once been bound by contract, and by a love that faded under the weight of indifference. Now we were free. Oceans apart, worlds apart, no need to meet again.